Hello, I'm Barbara Peters, and today I'm happy to be doing a book chat with Laurie King, one of my oldest and dearest friends and a fabulous author. Laurie and I have an interesting history of travel together, and it has come into play in two of her books. So, Laurie, I went to the Laurie King section of my personal library, and I have brought forth Dreaming Spies, which I am holding up. Maybe I think that works, right? And this has a great travel story behind it. So perhaps you'd like to remind people what it is.
Well, I had written in this this section in one of the earlier books of the Russell series, mentioning that she had returned from Japan. And I deliberately put that in there in order to force me to go to Japan, because I hadn't been there. It was this sort of place that you sort of think, I must go there someday. It sounds fascinating. But so I thought, well, if I put it in there, then I'm sort of obligated to go. I owe it to the fans, right? so I said something to you at some point about Japan, and you said, oh, we love Japan. Let's go. And I said, oh, okay, let's go. So we did, and we had many adventures.
We did have many adventures. As it happened, when you had raised the question, probably for the fourth time, Rob and I had already agreed to take our younger daughter and her husband on a trip to Vietnam, which I had resisted for many years for reasons you know. And it seemed like a natural adjunct to say, okay, we'll do that trip and then we'll just hop over to Japan.
Well, we're in the neighborhood.
And it turned out to be pretty difficult because at that time there were no air routes that flew from Vietnam to Japan. So we wound up visiting Hong Kong several times. It was like a rubber band. We went from Los Angeles to Hong Kong and Hong Kong to Hanoi. And then we went from Saigon to Hong Kong and Hong Kong to Osaka. And then back from the airport in Osaka, back to Hong Kong and back to Los Angeles. It's amazing. And if you remember, I was actually heading for a full knee transplant just about the day we returned. So you and Rob were forced to deal with me as a not fully active traveler, but you did well.
But honestly, Barbara Peters, relatively inactive, is leaving everybody else in the dust. So come on now.
Okay, I plead guilty. One of the wonderful things about Japan was our acquaintance with Japanese plumbing. In fact, you and I wrote a small book about the magnificence of the Toto Corporation and its products. I installed a full Toto toilet upon our return. Do you remember when we got to the man and woman bridge, that wonderful hidden valley in the wilds of Shikoku?
I remember it well, Barbara. And I hope Rob can edit in some stills on this, because it was, in fact, I was just looking through those the other day and I came across the video of you walking those bridges. We had been up through the mountains and had not seen another human being for like 5 or 6 hours. I mean, it was a long day, and we drove and we had maps, paper maps, but we were way off GPS, even if we had been able to work them. And we sort of emerged from this fascinating but extremely quiet period up in the mountains, and you spotted this billboard that had painting advertisement for these bridges, and of course it being in Japanese, we said, oh, bridges, and you said, oh, it's the bridges. and avoiding driving off the cliff with this excitement that comes from Barbara's side of the car, I said, bridges? And you then went on with one of your favorite novels that you needed to talk about the bridges.
In fact, it was Liam Herm's wonderful series. I can't recall the titles, but they were magnificent.
Nightingale Floor was the first one.
Thank you, The Nightingale Floor, a trilogy about feudal Japan and the, that whole saga. And in order to protect themselves, one side on Shikoku retreated up into the mountains and tore down the rope or vine bridges that you could use to cross the chasms. But one set has remained all this time. I don't know if it was reconstructed, called the Man Bridge and the Woman Bridge. But the best part was the freight bridge, which was a complete surprise. Remember, it had a little box car and you could haul supplies across. But the reason I mention it is that we are totally in the wilderness, except for the little woman at the booth where we paid her some number of yen in order to be admitted.
And it's been a very long day.
Yes, we've been lost on Shikoku and it didn't end here. But in any case, I went over the bridge. We had not had a rest stop for quite a while. And as we got over the bridge, I saw a little wooden hut. And I thought to myself, they have put in some version of a Japanese porta potty in case there are tourists. And the great part was, I went over to the little wooden hut, and as I opened the door, the Toto toilet inside rose, the lid rose to greet me, and a light came on, and the water went, and I thought, if Toto can do this toilet in this place, it has to be the toilet of your dreams, right? So I went over that one. It was wonderful. So we explored lots of other water options. There are hot springs because Japan is in fact on the rim of fire. So there are lots of hot springs and so forth. And Laurie and I wrote a wonderful little book called, what's it called, Laurie?
Not in Kansas, Toto?
You think something like You're Not in Kansas Anymore, Toto, or close. Clearly we ripped it off from, Dorothea and the Wizard. But anyhow, the best part, aside from that, was when we went to Nara. And Nara, being the original feudal capital of Japan and is still populated with sacred deer and so forth, has a magnificent hotel, which once was home to Queen Elizabeth during a visit to Japan, and where the emperor has stayed. And so obviously we felt that we should be guests. So we checked into the Hotel Nara, and after our stay, we checked out of the Hotel Nara, and once again, got lost. And ended up, do you remember that endless night after we left Japan's most sacred shrine on the holiday of all holidays when it was completely booked?
I have dreams about that. Yeah, we had asked the nice man in the car hire place to put in the addresses for the two places we were headed, one of which was this shrine area. And it was on one side of the peninsula. And the other was this spa hotel that we had booked into. We'd already booked in and paid for the night. But it was on the far side of it. So it would have been easy to drive in a loop to the other. But we got halfway along this road and realized that the man had put them in backwards. And we were headed for the night's accommodation rather than the place we wanted to see on the way. And we decided that we would turn back because we didn't want to miss this place. And it was indeed worth seeing. Unfortunately, it was also dusk when we got there, which was very scenic, but it meant that on a Friday night at the height of cherry blossom season, we had no hotel room because they wouldn't let us into this far hotel after, was it 11 or something? Anyway, they wouldn't let us in. We knew that from the site. And so there we were trying to find this hotel room anywhere, just anywhere, and unable to do it, of course. So
we had dinner in a Japanese truck shop, which was actually one of the better dinners we had in Japan. And we had no idea what we were eating or what we were ordering, but there was helpful truck drivers all around us who did. And then we headed back to Nara on the theory that surely in outskirts of Nara, we would find a hotel. Every single hotel of any stripe was completely booked. We even accidentally drove into a Japanese love motel.
No, it wasn't accidental. I was deliberately aiming for that because I figured at least it would take our money and give us a bed, even if it was a crowded bed.
Unfortunately, we could not master the technologies of payment, which because it was a love hotel, had to be totally anonymous. And we're a threesome too, which added to the fun. Anyway, Laurie finally, after striking out absolutely everywhere, was persuaded to call the Hotel Dara and announce that she is a famous American author, homeless and desperate for the night, would like to return. And, and in fact, they found a maid's room and let us in. And the maid's room had a corridor. And then at the end of the corridor was a small bathroom, and to the right was a bedroom. So the three of us checked in. And after that, everyone on duty at the Hotel Dara knocked at the door with various supplies, only to work out how this American threesome was actually going to spend the night. You and I shared the bed, and Rob made a bed on the floor with a sort of sheet of towel futon, and they would open the door and they would go, oh, and then they would go away. And they were very embarrassed. And then it was a bad room that they had to offer you, the famous American author. I think at the end, when we got home, didn't you inscribe a book and send it to the Hotel Dara?
I did. I certainly wrote their name in the dedication, in the acknowledgments, thanked them very much, and sent them a book, which I don't know quite what they made of it. But I did feel so sorry for those poor people, because we had phoned them earlier and they said, no, we have no room. So at desperation, I phoned them again, and it was nearly midnight. And I said, I basically blackmailed them by saying, you are our only friends here in Nara. I'm going to be sleeping in the car. 3 old crippled people will be sleeping in the car if you don't find us accommodation. And the poor man on the desk, I mean, there was this long silence, and he said, when can you get here? But I felt so sorry for him, because it really was emotional blackmail. And they really were ashamed of this perfectly nice room that was rather oddly shaped and looked over the dumpsters. But we were so grateful for, something that wasn't a car seat to sleep in, that I think we all would have kissed his feet, except it would have killed him in embarrassment.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. So the book that resulted is called Dreaming Spies, and it fills in your Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes history between, I think it was India and California, where they made that stop. But then you take Dreaming Spies back to Oxford, where part of the book takes place. Anyway, it was a great adventure. I have to say that Riviera Gold, which is your book coming up in June, this would be a good time to mention that Laurie is going to debut this book with me at the Poison Pen on June 6th at 2:00 in the afternoon. But it will be like this, a virtual event rather than a live event, but we will have autographed copies. But this book also comes at the end of another trip we made. This time not a threesome, but a fivesome, because we included the kids that went to Vietnam.
But we didn't all have to sleep in one room on this one. It was okay.
That's very true. So what we did is we started in Bucharest, which was completely fascinating, and made a trip up into the Transylvania to Dracula country. And then we went down to the Black Sea, and then we spent more time than we actually wished to on the river, because we had an engine failure. But we wound up in Budapest, and then you and Rob and I went to Vienna. So that was the background. And then you left us and went on your own, for you, to Monaco. So tell us about that and why you went there to write Riviera Gold.
Well, again, I kind of set the foundation for it in two books ago, 2 Russell books ago. There was one called The Murder of Mary Russell, which alarming title created a great stir among the fans. But spoiler alert, she doesn't die. So, but at the end of that, their longtime, Holmes's longtime landlady turned housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, has to flee England because of the revelations that have come out about her past, her very racy past. So as she is getting in the car to drive out into the night, Russell says to her, "You have to tell me where you're going. Where will I find you?" And Mrs. Hudson pauses and says thoughtfully, "You know, I've always been fond of Monte Carlo." And I thought, well, if she's fond of Monte Carlo, perhaps I need to find out why. So when Barbara and Rob set off up to the Frankfurt Book Fair, I went off in the other direction to fly into Nice and to take a taxi into Monaco, which is a very interesting little tiny city, country, principality, where I felt like the cleaning woman because there was no way I was going to compete sartorially or financially with any of the people walking around. And I drove up to the hotel and found a whole series of bright red Maseratis parked outside waiting for a tour of wealthy American men and their very decorative younger female wives to go off for the day. And it was a fascinating place. I walked around it. I poked my nose into all kinds of places. Invariably, when I do this kind of thing, I come away with all kinds of photographs and notes and all the rest of it. And yet, when I start doing the actual focused in research, I find all these things that I didn't do and I should have. So I then had to spend 6 months deciding what I was going to do and where I should have gone and didn't. But I loved the place. It was just such an unlikely sort of venture. And in 1925, which is where Russell and Holmes are at the moment, it's just the beginning of that fascinating period of the Riviera where it becomes active in the summer. It's always been a winter resort area for Northern Europe. But once the Americans move into Paris, the art and literature movement into Paris, they discover that the Riviera can actually be lovely and it's very cheap. And it's really not that much worse than the East Coast of the US in the summertime. So why not? So the Cole Porter and his wife go down and hire a villa there for the summer in 1922, and they invite their friends, Sarah and Gerald Murphy, along. And the Murphys fall in love with it. The next year, they persuade the local ritzy hotel not to shut in May, but to stay open with one wing. And we're willing to pay. And they do. And they end up buying a house there and inviting all their friends. And by 1925, everybody who's everybody is coming down for the summer. And you get the Fitzgeralds and you get Hemingway later on the year. He doesn't come till 26, but Picasso. It's just a fascinating time. And I thought, well, surely Mary Russell would find something interesting in that crew.
But where does Mrs. Hudson fit in? Because it wasn't an expensive place to live then, like it is now. I mean, as you point out, you really have to have a very serious income, to actually live in Monaco, or a lot of the time to visit. The late Philip Kerr, who had a wonderful gift for satire, and I can't remember the name of it, but he wrote a one-off book about a ghostwriter, I think it was, who something to do with a writer who got fed up with his gig. But anyway, it was all in Monaco. And I remember that Phil told me that he wrote the book so he could go and visit Monaco and, fit in, so to speak, or, as a writer, perhaps be celebrated enough that the income disparity wouldn't affect anything. So did you claim to be a famous writer when you were there, as you did in Japan?
I honestly, for one thing, no, I never think of myself as a famous writer. I will introduce myself as a writer because it gives me an excuse to be there, and people look at me sideways like, okay. But I figured in a place like Monaco, who's going to be impressed unless you're Stephen King? Nobody's going to be impressed. So I didn't. I merely took notes and nodded my head and felt like a day tripper in the whole world. But yeah, it was an excuse to go there, I think.
Well, but maybe a sort of cloak of invisibility that then dropped over you, as in fact often happens to older women like us, regardless of where we are, makes it possible to be an observer in a way that, you know, if people were paying more attention to you, it would be more difficult.
Right. Yeah. And the fact that, you know, I wasn't wearing the kinds of clothes. I mean, for one thing, I'd been on the road for 2 months. So I was looking a little travel worn probably, but you know, I just don't have that kind of clothes that has designer tags in it, and people who work and live around the wealthy, the extremely wealthy, instantly recognize things that I have no clue about. So there's just no point in me even playing the game. But as you say, as an outsider, you know, because you're ignored, there's all kinds of things that you can see and do that goes under the radar. And that's sort of what I was aiming at with Mrs. Hudson anyway, because of course she's in the book in 1925, she's almost 70, she's 69 years old. And and her birthday is tomorrow, by the way. It's the 9th of June, 9th of May. But because she's an older woman, she can vanish into things a lot more than an attractive young woman could do. And women with brains can really take advantage of that, such as Mrs. Hudson.
Well, Sherlock Holmes will always be, I think, very visible wherever he is. But let's not talk anymore about it now. Let's do another talk as we get closer to pub day, because we have lots of other stories. In my search of the Laurie King section of my own library, I came across Mary Russell's War, a wonderful book. And you have let me know, let me see here, that one of the stories in Mary Russell's War, which leads to the murder of Mary Russell and now Riviera Gold, has been the center of a contest that you've done. So tell us about that.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. I got the publishers to agree to give away the story because it's one of those in that short story collection. It's one that I wrote in the mid-90s. I probably wrote it in 96 for Sharon Newman and Mimi Manfredo did a collection. And it was the first time I'd been asked to do a short story. I think it was called Crime Through Time. And so I wrote one about Mrs. Hudson's case, in which she is ignored by Holmes, goes around the back of him and Russell, solves the case and gets away with it. And it's, you know, it's sort of the first indication that we readers have that there's more to Mrs. Hudson than just bringing cups of tea. So when I reread the story, I realized that it was perfect as a tie-in to not only the murder of Mary Russell, but Riviera Gold, because it's all about how old women get away with stuff. And so I gave it away for free. I said, let's do an illustrated version of this, like I'd done for the story for you earlier, The Customer. We did an illustrated edition on that. But I opened this one up instead to the fans. And I said, send me your artwork for this story. People who end up in the final illustrated version will get a hardback of Riviera Gold when it comes out. And people who just send me the thing and don't quite get in there because it's a limited number of pages, I'll send them an advanced reading copy, which is one of these things that you're waving around. And so I had, I don't know, maybe 20 or so people send in stuff. And we had some just fabulous drawings. So I've made an illustrated edition of Mrs. Hudson's case. And we're putting it up on the website, on the page for the Mary Russell's War, which I should also mention is available both as an ebook and as a very, very nice paperback from Poison Pen Press.
This very book, in fact, that I was holding up.
That very book, you guys did a lovely cover for it and a lovely edition.
I'm very proud of it. Now, there are two other stories in Mary Russell's War that I think are worth mentioning. One is the marriage of Mary Russell, because you avoided the wedding and the honeymoon when you were writing your way along. And I think that there was a certain fan pressure there, or maybe it was your own, that pushed you to actually tell us what happened when Russell and Holmes got married.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day that especially when I was first starting with writing, I tended to write a book in parts, that I would write a section and then I'd come to a part where I wasn't quite sure what to do. So I would just hop on to a section that was where I wanted it to be. And I would write there and then eventually fill in when I knew where I needed them to be. I also did that with actual books, because I wrote the first two Russells that I wrote became number 1 and number 3. Because again, the one that I wrote second, A Monstrous Regiment of Women. No, the one I wrote second was A Letter of Mary. And I published that third because I, in the meantime, had written the second one. Once I had 1 and 3, I could see where I needed the second one to be. So I think that the marriage of Mary Russell worked in kind of the same way, that I had to live with them for a while to know what that marriage would have looked like. It also happened to be a time when we were working around how to promote the murder of Mary Russell. So I thought, well, it ties in by way of title, so maybe I should write the marriage now. And so I did, and I had a lot of fun with it.
You did have a lot of fun with it, and unsurprisingly, it's an unconventional wedding, but all the more fun. The other thing you did, and I know you did it for me to get me off your back, because many years back, and I don't remember the title, but you wrote Russell and Holmes.
It would have been Justice Hall.
Sorry?
It would have been Justice Hall, wouldn't it?
Yes. It was Justice Hall, which had a lot to do with the actual war and things that happened in the war to
At a stately home.
Yes, and you said to me that you had wanted to call it Stately Homes, which I thought was just beyond brilliant, but your publisher dissuaded you. So I have nagged you forever to write Stately Homes. And finally, as the ultimate story in Mary Russell's War, you were kind enough to write a short story called Stately Homes. So I thank you.
I only do these things for you, Barbara.
Well, you have to admit, it was a really brilliant title.
It was far too good to let it go by. I mean, I really needed to be able, but I had to have a setup so that I could write Stately Homes in a stately home.
Yes.
And so I thought, this is where it goes. What was that for? I can't remember what collection it was in. Did I write it separately?
No, I think you wrote it just for this. That's my memory of it, is that, it was a new story you wrote for Mary Russell's War. But yes, it was Justice Hall that it originally was to be applied to, because that, in fact, was a country house murder, that particular setup. So I was thinking about what your conversation about the Riviera, Reese Bowen and I did in before, capital B now, in February, a new book by her, a standalone, called Above the Bay of Angels, in which she talked about Queen Victoria traveling to the Riviera and taking her entire household, including furniture and all, even though she didn't want to be called, the Empress. She just wanted to be known as in a more casual way. Yeah. But anyway, that was when the Riviera was, as you point out, a winter playground. And that was probably in the 1890s, something like that. And so it has moved along. I think a lot of that winter has now moved for Northern Europe to Spain and Portugal. The Algarve and the Scots apparently go to the southern coast of Spain, which I can't remember, there's a name for it. probably less crowded and less expensive.
Yeah, the Costa del Sol.
Oh, it's the cost, yeah, right. And then the Costa Brava in Portugal. But as you point out, at the time you were writing, it was really very much a playground, especially for the British, in the same way that going to Egypt was an excellent thing to do to escape the British winter. Dana and I, as you know, Dana Stavinow, who's going to join us for another book talk. I spoke to her yesterday and she's looking forward to it. Traveled to Egypt in December. We stayed at those old, Thomas Cook hotels. It was really heartbreaking, in fact, to read that Thomas Cook went bankrupt and out of business, and when he was the pioneer of all of that kind of wonderful travel.
I know. It's yes, the last year has been hard on all kinds of people.
It is, although that company's bankruptcy preceded this current crisis. But anyway, it reminded us, and I was thinking as we walked down in Luxor at the Winter Palace Hotel, which was, where people like Amelia Peabody stayed and so forth. The corridor, Laurie, I swear to you, it was like 30 or 40 feet wide. I mean, it was just immense. It was almost like being in a railroad terminal hall or something. And we realized that it was built for Victorian women, and there were enormous clothes so that they could, in fact, move up and down these hallways. It was so incredibly spacious. And I think the thing I remember most about Monaco and the casino, a story we can talk about another time, is how tiny it was.
Yeah.
Just little. So, it's interesting how the past, even things like fashion, dictated so much, of the way we think about the past and how things were configured.
I wonder if it was built when the crinolines were huge in the 1860s then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they traveled with maids. So do you remember in Vienna where we had those remarkable rooms in that great hotel? I mean, I've stayed in smaller houses than the suite that we had, and an enormous part of it was created for their wardrobes and for the servant, because you had to have a person to take care of that kind of clothing. You could not get in and out of it, let alone care for it. And I remember years ago reading an article about Diana Vreeland, who was the editor of Vogue, and a real fashion icon forever, that she had a personal maid whose duty every night was to polish the soles of her shoes. Every night. Wow.
Well, okay.
I'm just saying there was an attention to detail, and to grooming and to fashion that we don't observe today, and we wouldn't even have the patience, let alone, the energy or, well, certainly the money is there, but I think that people are too impatient for that kind of thing today.
Well, also in the 19th century, I mean, just moving was filthy. I mean, anytime you set foot out of the house, you're walking through piles of horse dung. Every surface is stained with wood smoke. I mean, everything is filthy. So you have to have somebody caring for, everything from the waist down, certainly on your clothing, or else you would never go out of the house. So it's a little easier now that we have a washing machine we can throw things to.
Well, I certainly can't say that. Anyway, I enjoyed Reese's book very much, and it did remind me. Have you read anything lately that you would like to recommend outside your own books?
I'm reading Murder at the Mina House. Have you come across that one yet?
Actually, not only have I come across it, but the store is full of it because Erica was coming to do a program this month, and we were going to do a whole Egyptian, because Dana and I stayed at Mina House.
Oh, yeah.
And now we're postponing it because she's still hoping that she may be able to travel. But yes, I did read it. What did you like about it?
I'm reading it now. I'm enjoying it. The voice of a sort of modern woman in the early, was it the early or middle 20s? early
I
20s.
don't know, sometime in the 20s, right?
Yeah, plunked down into Egypt. I just I'm having great fun with it. Erica Ruth Neubauer.
Mhm.
Neubauer.
And the great thing about the Mina House is that it is right at the footstep of the Great Pyramid. And I still remember Dana and I were totally trashed by the time we got off our, 20-hour flight to Egypt or whatever, and we didn't really see it. But because of the time thing, we were up at 4 in the morning, and we had adjoining rooms, unlike our stay at Nara House, where you and I not only share the room but the bed. Dana and I actually had our own bed in our own room, and our own
Oh,
coffee maker in our
oh,
own room. I know. So we each made coffee, and fortunately, they also had chocolate. So since I couldn't get a cappuccino, I was able to dilute the acid in the coffee with the handy chocolate. And we stepped out on her balcony to sit there and drink our coffee. And the sun started illuminating the pyramid, and it came into light behind the trees. And there's a gate at the entry to the Mina House that is shaped so that the second pyramid, not the great one, but the one behind it, that the top of it fits into the top opening in the gate. So you get this kind of double image of it. It was truly magical. But
lovely.
the Marriott Hotel people have completely changed. The Mina House in Erica Ruth's book is not the Mina House that you see today, although the location, is the same. But modern travel requires much more amenity than was available in the 1920s.
Yes. Yeah, we're not too keen on mosquito nets and fans anymore.
And you want real plumbing. Yes, exactly. So May is really a busy month. There are an awful lot of good books coming out, and I thought that both April and May were very rich in paperbacks, some original and some, in fact, reprints as come along from earlier hardcover books. But with people doing more reading, this has been a great time. So I'm going to be focusing on looking at new paperback fiction and see what I can particularly recommend. I really like Jeffrey Deaver's new book, The Goodbye Man, and you would like it because you wrote a book about a cult. And Jeffrey writes a book that you think is really about the cult, but the cult is not what you think it is. Which is always true with Jeffrey, is that nothing is ever really what you think it is when you read a Jeffrey Deaver book. I don't want to spoil it by saying what, but I thought of you because you were really, your interest was really the cult and how that dynamic worked, which is different than his. Do you remember what was the name of that book?
That was Darker Place.
Or Moon? Did it have Moon in the title?
That's the moon. The Birth of the New Moon is the British title. That was my title, and the U.S. publishers didn't care for it, so they changed the name of it to a Darker Place. But yeah, I mean, I was fascinated. My background is in theology and religion, and I was fascinated by by the process by which a cult becomes a religion, and how all religious groups have gone through this period where they are a cult and they explore how to fit into society more comfortably and become a more established religion. And so that's kind of what I was looking at with the Darker Place. That it's a cult because it's new, but does that mean that it's dangerous and cult-like? Maybe not. So, but I definitely have Jeff's book on my list. I haven't bought it yet, but I will do so.
I very much enjoyed it. And the next night, that will be Monday, May 11th, that Jeffrey and I will be talking on another virtual event. And the next night, Scott Turow has written yet another book set in Kindle County, which is inspired by Chicago, where he and I grew up in that area. In fact, we both grew up or spent time in Winnetka. That's where I spent my childhood, and Scott lived for a long time and may still live there for all I know. But anyway, it's interesting because he's written a number of books set in this fictional version of Chicago,
Mhm.
and followed several characters. But I was thinking about him. Do you remember Presumed Innocent? I'm going to assume you read it because
Yeah.
everybody read it, right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, in this wave of, trust no one and unreliable narrators and so forth, that Scott was really a pioneer, because Presumed Innocent was just so much in that. And I'm going to say it again. I remember people standing at the sales counter when the bookstore was very young, 30 some, 30 years ago, and arguing about who actually did it and how the book ended.
Yeah.
It was so ambiguous that people didn't, I mean, they had different conclusions when they
Yeah.
finished the book.
Yeah. 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 And it was interesting. That was one of those, I mean, the movie of it was great with Harrison Ford, but it was not ambiguous. As I remember, it was not an ambiguous ending. And that was interesting to see the difference in film and the movie.
I think it would be difficult to make it that way in a movie. I think that more clarity probably was required, for the film version. And there was also some early forensics in there that, were not well known, which contributed to the whole thing. But anyway, it's fun there are a few advantages to growing old, but one of them is I have found that I have read so many authors in real time. So that, I've read your books from the day you published, The Beekeeper's Apprentice right on through. And for Scott, he wrote 1L before I was a bookseller, but I read it in real time and everything. Tony Hillerman, Robert Parker, Sue Grafton, all these authors, Sarah Paretsky, go on and on. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful to have read the whole arc of their career. And I'm sad. I learned today that Marion Wood, Sue Grafton and Phil Kerr's long time editor, died yesterday.
Hmm.
And I was thinking, Marion was their editor for all their books, or Sue's anyway, and most of Phil's, I think. And how difficult it would have been for either of those authors if Marion had predeceased them, but it turned out the other way around.
Yeah.
So the role of an editor, I think, became a thought for me today. How important is an editor in shaping a book? And I know you lost your longtime editor, and it's been a tremendous trauma for you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I've had two editors, and I was very disappointed that Malice Domestic was canceled this year. Although in some ways it's good because I may get to go next year, because this year I probably wouldn't have made it. Ruth Cavan was the ghost of honor to be honored at Malice Domestic, because Ruth was my first editor, and she was so good for a new editor. She was not an aggressive editor, but her eye was so good. And then when I shifted to Bantam in the 90s with Kate Misiak was my editor for a long time. And when she left them this last year, it was hard. It was hard because she and I had worked together for 20 years. And it's a fascinating relationship and very personal. And if you find a good editor that you live with for all those years, and there's nothing quite like it. Certainly, I could never have succeeded in the self-pub world because I need an editor. I need someone who sees what I'm trying to do and tells me where I'm not quite managing. And although you can hire people to edit, they're never going to be hard on you because you're paying them. And I've always found it difficult to feel really good about a self-pub editorial relationship. But yeah, I've been really fortunate to have two extraordinarily capable and loving women who just adore crime fiction.
You have been very lucky. And in fact, that's one of the things that I have most enjoyed about being a bookseller for 30 years is getting to know these editors. I was speaking to Kathy Trocek, now writing as Mary Kay Andrews, yesterday about Carolyn Marino, who was a longtime mystery editor at HarperCollins, and how we miss her. So, I feel fortunate as a bookseller to have had these long relationships. This would have been fun, Laurie, to talk to you. Let's book another one with Dana in a couple weeks, and we'll do maybe 2 more leading up to Riviera Gold on June the 6th.
Be lovely. I should also mention, since we're talking about Sue Grafton, her last story is in Deadly Anniversaries, the Bill Proncini, Marcia Muller collection that MWA published and that I was the liaison for. I edited it for MWA and wrote a story in it. But our prize of that particular collection is a story that Sue wrote. She had written it before, and it is not a Kinsey Milhone, but it's very Sue. And it was lovely that she gave it to us, and that her daughter and husband allowed us to continue with it. So I really feel very privileged to have been Sue's editor for a short time.
You were very privileged. I will add, as a coda to that Sue's husband, Steve, agreed that the second Library of Congress crime classic, which Leslie Klinger, your friend and fellow Sherlockian, is editing for Poison Pen Press, will be Sue's father, C.W. Grafton's first mystery, The Rat Began to Gnaw the Rope, which will be out, in fact, in June. So I'm really excited about that, and I would like to think that Sue, because she and I had talked about when she finished Z, because we assumed then that she would be doing that. We're the same age, Sue and I, so I still can't believe she's gone. In any case, a project that she had considered would be to bring out her father's 3 mysteries. So I'm really delighted that that we're doing that. And Les, is a fearless annotator. Can't resist, in fact, annotating anything. Is the editor for that and has done his usual amazing job with it. Actually, maybe you and Les and I can have a little chat one of these days too.
Yeah, just gonna say, it'll be fun.
Yep, it would be. Anyway, thanks so much. You have a great weekend, Laurie.
I hope you find many good books to read.
I have about 12 sitting right next to me. So as soon as I end this, I'm plunging in. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.